Welcome to Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. The opinions and information expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Lantern Publishing and Media Incorporated. Hello, everyone. It is great to have you back here with us. Welcome to Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. My name is Luisa. I am your host for this episode. Our introduction for this episode will be a little bit longer, but that is because we have so many amazing guests. We got a very special two-part episode for you today, and it's one of our new releases, Exploring Topics in Non-Human Coexistence. In this first part, we talked with editor Nathan Poirier and authors Emily Tronetti and Lucrezia Barucca. In 2 weeks from now, we'll release part 2 with 3 more authors that contributed to this book, Amanda Williams, Mark Sushita, and Varun Joshi. Exploring Topics in Non-Human Coexistence is a collection of essays that talk about living and coexisting in a larger-than-human world. The authors come from many backgrounds, and the essays talk about topics such as Black transfeminism, Brahminical vegetarianism, spirituality, humane education, and actions that go beyond education when it comes to animal rights activism. The book came out March 6, 2025, and it is available for purchase everywhere you buy books, including on ebook format on our website. Stay with us here until the very end of the episode to get a special discount coupon on our ebook store for all books ever featured here on Lantern Voices. It is the first time that we have so many guests in an episode and the first time that we have a two-part episode, so after you hear both of them, let us know what you think about this format. You can leave your thoughts in the comments if you're listening to this episode on Spotify or YouTube or Apple Podcasts. But if you're in a different platform, that's okay too. Just let us know how we're doing on our social media. We are at Lantern PM on Instagram and Blue Sky, Lantern Publishing and Media on Facebook, and at Lantern PM Official on TikTok. So let's go to today's interview. Nathan, Emily, and Lucrezia, welcome to Lantern Voices. Hello, everyone. Welcome. How are y'all doing today?
Great. How are you?
I am doing great as well, and I'm very happy to have you here at Lantern Voices with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
I will start presenting you all to our listeners, but I would like you to do that a little bit. So my first question is, how did you end up as contributors to this book? What was your journey to get here? And we were talking before the recording a little bit that you do know each other, that you had great conversation before. So how did that happen? Who are you and how did you get here today?
Emily, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. I feel like you should go because you're the one who at least brought me into this, but okay, I guess I'll go. So yes, my name is Emily, pronouns are she, hers, and I had the pleasure of attending the anthrozoology program at Canisius University with Nathan, and then also two of the other editors, Sarah and Aaron. And I think it was 2018 is when I graduated the anthrozoology program. And then a couple years later, I started my own business called Coexistence Consulting. So when Nate reached out to me about the book, I was very excited because the topic of coexistence is something I'm very passionate about. And I was also just really excited to just deepen my connections with some of the colleagues and friends that I had made throughout the anthrozoology program, including Nathan here. And then also at the time when Nate contacted me about the book, I was a doctoral student at Antioch University, specializing in humane education. And my very first day of the program, I met Macy Sutton, who has a background in human health and vegan advocacy, which, paired well with my background in animal well-being and anthrozoology. And so we have since collaborated on several projects and have become very dear friends. And so it just felt like the perfect fit to ask her to co-write the chapter that we wrote for this book. And so, yeah, it was just a really fun experience to, again, reconnect with Nate, Sarah, and Aaron, and then to work with Macy and to now see the chapter published.
Amazing.
All right. So I guess my involvement. So I am an editor and a contributor. The contributor role I consider much more incidental to this project. The editor goal or role was much more intentional. So this book was viewed by myself as well as Sarah Tomasello, the lead editor of this book, as a extension of a previous book Sarah and I did together. So we put out a call for chapters for a book 3 years ago now, and we got a lot of responses, almost overwhelming. So we decided to do 2 books. We split the responses up into sections or chapters, ideas that seemed to make sense together. So one book was one general idea, and this coexistence book was a second idea. So a lot of the chapter ideas seem to work together well. So we kind of split them in two in this way. So that's kind of how we came to this book. Sarah and I have been academic partners for a while. We've done a lot together. And so we were looking to edit together, and we did. So this is the second book published that her and I have edited, because Sarah and I also went to this Canisius. Well, Sarah went to Canisius for undergrad and the anthrozoology graduate degree that Emily, myself, Aaron, and maybe one or two others from this book did as well. We wanted to make this more of a Canisius affair. Once we kind of realized that and got Aaron on as a third editor, we were looking to extend that connection kind of as deeply as we could get it. And then in terms of having any chapters in this book myself, was mostly an opportunity since this book was happening and I had some ideas. I figured this was a good place to just go ahead and put them.
So my name is Lucrezia Barucca, and my pronouns is she. So basically, at the time of the call for contributors, which I remember correctly was around May 2022, I was studying environmental humanities at Ca' Foscari University in Venice. And particularly, I was attending a course on critical animal studies, where I discovered about this call and was suggested to send any of my ideas for contributing to the book. And so it was a beautiful coincidence because I had been working on this topic of suffering, which was my contribution to the book, even before starting the master. And actually, I must say also that it was thanks to those researches that I ended in this field of study. In fact, I had written my final thesis of bachelor about the unnecessary suffering of non-human animals, according to some less known works of Russian writer Lev Tolstoy. However, my research had never been published, and therefore this book was the opportunity to bring a part of it to light. I just sent my ideas to the editors, and we had some discussions then, and working with them was amazing because we could exchange our ideas, and they've always been like very, very available to accept what was my view on things and how to write them. But at the same time, it was the first time also that I was being edited. So it was interesting to me to see this editing process, how it worked, and also to accept for the first time that someone could put hands on my work. So I really appreciated it as an experience.
This collaboration process, how was it to work on the book with other people and not just by yourself?
Do you want to go first, Nathan?
I can, yeah, sure. So, yeah, editing with multiple editors. So I've edited multiple books every time with at least one other person, and I prefer that. It's just nice to collaborate. So when there's more than one person, you can also split tasks, which really helps with responsibilities and what you do or what you feel like doing, what you're stronger in doing or weaker in doing. You can complement each other. So that's one of the things we were looking for. And since this non-human coexistence book became the second book, when that was not our plan, Sarah and I, we were looking for more editors to help with that workload, since now we are looking at 2 books instead of one. So we had this idea of bringing on other people, and we both have worked with other people. And since Sarah and I had already worked together and collaborated, we knew that was good. We felt like we could bring others on. And so that's really what happened. I mean, Aaron and Mark, well, I knew both of them. And so I figured they would be good to work with, and they were good to work with. And so we just had a lot of communication. That was the big thing, is we would let each other know when we were available, what we wanted to do, like what chapters we were maybe most interested in reading, or more like editing, so that we could play to each other's strengths. And we just kind of saw who was available for what throughout the whole process and split this pretty evenly. The editor name order is rather arbitrary. We put Sarah first on purpose because this was, again, part of a collaboration between her and I. So her name and my name switch order as we alternate when Sarah and I collaborate on things. But Sarah took a lot of the lead on this book and making a lot of the bigger decisions and such. Good working with people, and I mean, I would even edit with 5 people, but four is a good number. But it's just nice to have other voices in the mix, other opinions and strengths.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that experience. I mean, for me, it helped with collaborating with someone who I had collaborated with in the past, and the fact that Macy and I are also friends, made it like a very enjoyable experience. And in many ways, Macy and I work very similarly, but we also are very different too. Kind of, Nate, like what you were saying about kind of bringing out the different strengths. Like that was definitely my experience writing with Macy. We both definitely have different writing styles and just slightly different ways of thinking about things, while also still kind of having those same core values. So I felt like it helped broaden the perspectives that we could incorporate into the chapter, while also kind of holding true to the goal of the chapter. And I personally really enjoy collaborating. I feel like if given the opportunity, I will collaborate with someone on things, just because, again, you end up expanding the perspectives that you can incorporate, and you're able to hopefully also reach a wider audience through bringing in more voices. So I'm a big fan of collaboration.
That is so true. I think the three of you have similar yet different experiences with this project. It's very interesting because we're talking about coexistence, and yes, we're talking about coexistence with non-human animals, but it's also coexistence with your fellow authors and with everybody, making sure that this project is going to come in unity. One of the things that I love the most about all the anthologies that we have and essay collections that we have at Lantern, and it's something that I read in a Brazilian book a while ago, is the importance of having multiple voices in contemporary nonfiction writing, especially because we're so hyper-connected with internet and everything that we can benefit from that. We don't need to have like a single point of view anymore, and we can use that to our benefit. So my next question is for Nathan, but everyone can jump in if they like, is that right at the introduction, the editors talk about non-interference as a guiding principle. So Nathan, can you talk about how the principle of non-interference connects with the book's title, Non-Human Coexistence? And I think that / instead of a hyphen was a very intentional choice. I think it has to do with this.
Yes, it is. So I will, talk about that / specifically. First, though, connecting non-interference to the title, at least the part of the title, Non-Human Coexistence. I basically wrote those parts of the introduction on this idea. And so this was an idea I've had for a while. I really like the idea of non-interference, of leaving others alone to a good extent. So when it came time to write this introduction, it was at a time when I kind of felt lost for ideas. And so what I decided to do was kind of bring some things together I had written in various places, fairly fragmented parts of ideas that were unpublished, and bring them together. And I just kind of thought that would also fit the book as well, because the people were fairly fragmented. And the non-interference idea was something that I had written about in like school papers, and I had talked to people about, and I've just heard other people write about it or talk about it. And every single time, I don't think I had ever encountered someone talking favorably about this idea. And every time, not only was it not favorable, but there seemed to be a knee-jerk negative reaction whenever I brought it up. To the extent where people really just didn't want to listen. They had preconceived ideas and thought non-interference was ridiculous. And so it just kind of annoyed me for a long time. And while I was a student, I kept it a little quieter because you're still building confidence at that point. And so I thought this book was then a really good opportunity to put this here as kind of a statement and to flesh it out a little bit more. And there's a couple big reasons why I think non-interference works as a good underlying principle for non-human coexistence. And one of those is that many, if not most of us in the world these days are disengaged from nature now. We are very separated, and that may not be by choice, but we are. If our modes of civilization were cut off, most of us do not know how to procure food. Most of us do not know how to build shelters or even maintain our own shelters. We do not know how to find water or purify it for drinking. Any of us that rely on medications or even things like glasses, we would be in major, major trouble if civilization were to collapse. And so my thought there is that we don't know what we're doing. And so if we try to intervene in non-human nature, we are not going to do a good job, at least by and large. Many individuals, we just won't be able to do it. We don't have the knowledge. And so I think it's a bit arrogant to think that we can just interfere in various ways and that things are going to be okay. And the second reason related is kind of anti-mainstream Anthropocene thinking, and that is specifically, there's maybe only about 2 million species that are known, but there's easily up to something like 50 million or more species that are believed to exist. And so we only even know about, and we don't necessarily know much about many of those species we do know about, but we only know a small fraction of the total species that exist. So again, I think it's pretty arrogant to think that we can just control life, that we can control biological, chemical, physical processes when we hardly really know anything that's even out there. So a lot of this reason for the non-interference stems from a general human ignorance and arrogance. And that's of course not in every single person and whatnot, but I think those reasons do kind of override in general. And then to connect this to the non-human coexistence, but particularly non-human with a slash, is with that wording, we wanted to bring together humans and non-humans, but also allow for differences. And so I think the slash accomplishes that, where human and non-human are brought together without a space, without a word and, but they're also kept slightly separate with that forward slash. So it kind of brings together, but allows for differences. And this is a little bit awkward to read, as well as maybe a little bit awkward to think about. But that was the point, is we wanted to provoke thought and draw people's attention to this idea. What about bringing together but allowing for differences? And I don't even know if non/human is considered a word. If you add that slash, what happens? And that's part of the awkwardness and the thought that we really wanted to provoke. And then this also extends to humans in general as well. So some of the reasons I was giving before about humans not knowing what to do really about or in non-human nature, but leaving other people alone, I think also works really well. And in particular, I think of things like colonialism and gender. Colonization should not exist because in those sorts of instances, those people should have been left alone. Right? It is not okay to just take over another culture or to wipe out another people. If instead the colonizers had left them alone, I think we'd be in better shape. And similar for gender, especially right now with this whole two gender, issue and defining it that way, that's nonsense. And so if someone hears of a gender that they don't know or that they don't understand, I think just leave it alone. Like you do not need to bother people who are identifying in some way. That's not harming anybody. And so if we just left that alone, right, let people be in those sorts of respects, I think we'd be a lot better off.
We know the vegan activist community is out there, and we want to connect with each and every one of you. We are proud supporters of initiatives that fight for a more compassionate world for all animals, humans and non-humans alike. For more content on vegan activism, follow Lantern on social media. We are Lantern Publishing and Media on Facebook, at Lantern PM on Instagram, and at Lantern PM Official on TikTok.
My first thought is when you were talking about that forward slash and what made you think. I think the first time that I was looking into it, when I first read the title, it was like, oh, you're talking about coexistence. You're talking about humans and non-humans coexisting together. So that's why it's the slash, because everybody is kind of one single, I don't want to say entity, but like world, universe, we're all inhabiting the same place. And those are some topics that are touched in some of the essays. So that was my first thought. When you talk about non-interference and people have like a knee-jerk reaction, why do you think that happens?
I think because negative or bad versions of terms get popularized. The same sort of thing happens with various ideas like antinatalism. That was a topic we had in the first, and we emphasized in the first book with Sarah, as well as things like human extinction or something I came across recently that evokes the same sort of thing, and or anarchism. And so I think people just there's a popular imagination of terms, and I'm not necessarily sure where it comes from. It's probably different for different terms, but a lot of things just get propagated. So, like with antinatalism, what always comes to people's minds is coerced, restrictive reproduction. And that's not what antinatalists are talking about. If you actually go read them, that's not what they're talking about. And so, but that's important. That is an important idea, and that is related. And somehow people pick up on this stuff and they just run with it. And I can tell because people who make these sorts of accusations of, well, this is what that term means, and that's ridiculous, and you shouldn't use it. When I go read the literature of these terms, like I do, that these people are dismissing, you see that it's completely different than all these people dismiss it as. So clearly, these reactions are coming from a place also of ignorance, and so I think it's just one of outright dismissal from popular things that they hear and don't think to go interrogate themselves. So we wanted to put this out there and make people confront it, whether they liked it or not.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say that, I thought that the editors did such a great job of describing this concept in a way that does really explain the benefits of non-interference and also maybe put some of those minds at ease that might have that, initial reaction. Because even if I'm being like, if I'm being reflective, I also had that kind of like reaction at first. Like, how could we possibly not interfere with other animals when we're so connected with them? And also, I think that there's this. Obviously, there's the one piece, the control piece, right? Humans like to be in control, and this idea of not interfering means that maybe a loss of control, which obviously humans aren't big fans of. But for me personally, I also felt like, oh, non-interference, that's like taking away these relationships that I have with other animals, and that doesn't feel good. But obviously, the deeper I dug into this, and especially like reading, how the editors spoke about this, that's not really what it's about, at least how I interpreted it. There's, of course, going to be situations when it doesn't benefit the other animals to be in relation with humans, and we have to respect that. But of course, in the immediate term, we are living with companion animals. There are billions of farmed animals on this planet. Like, there are animals that we necessarily have to interact with, that we have to, be in relationship with. And so to me, this idea of non-interference really comes down to like understanding the perspectives of the other animals and determining how they would choose to engage with us and allow that to lead those interactions and relationships. And so, yeah, I just really appreciated that perspective, and also, that you did explore, Nate, that you like explored kind of the nuance of like, we do recognize that there are situations where, interference and interaction might have to occur. Of course, I can't just stop taking care of my dogs and my cat, but there's also so many examples, like even in my relationships with my dogs and my cat, for example, if I'm embodying this idea of non-interference, to the best of my ability, I'm attending to how they want to interact with me. Like, do they consent to me touching them? And so I think that kind of this idea of non-interference kind of, at least for me, again, forces me to take a step back and to kind of question what our relationships and interactions with other animals could be if we actually attended to what they want and need, and not imposed ourselves, as humans, into their lives, if that makes sense.
It's like attended and respected in a way, because from what I've learned reading the book, even if you have the best of intentions, it's not about doing what you think is best, because usually people, and I'll include non-human animals in that, people know what's best for them. So they also know what's best for them. We don't have to like put ourselves in this pedestal. So I think that's what I grasped from the context that you're talking about in non-interference.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's about actually, and Nate, I feel like this also kind of speaks to what you mentioned earlier about when you were talking about how humans, like, we don't even know. We don't really know about the other animals, the other species, the other beings that we share this earth with. And so, who are we to see ourselves as the ones that must control or manage? Yeah. And Nate, I would love to hear if you have any like follow-up thoughts, or if I misinterpreted the way that you envision this concept kind of coming to being. Like, I would love to hear your thoughts.
So whenever you put an idea out there, it's open to interpretation. So I, realize that any way anyone or any contributor interprets that is fine. Realized we opened it up to that if we were going to publish it. But no, I think that's it's great the way you're thinking about this too. But just one small other comment I wanted to say is Louisa brought up respect. He said that word respect, and I swear I read this somewhere, but respect implies restraint, and so that's the idea here. If you actually respect others, then you need to restrain yourself from interfering on them to a harmful extent. And in a sense, it's that simple. It's that simple, I think, in theory, but it can be much more complicated in practice.
When I was talking about the choice for the forward slash, and now we're talking about respect, restraint, coexistence, and all. I think the word I was looking for was a word that Lucrezia puts in her chapter, that is interbeing. So I'll try to hook this a little bit with what you were talking about in your chapter, to sum it very briefly based on what I understood in my own words. So please correct me if I understood something wrong. Interbeing would be the idea that everything that is human, non-human, alive or not, it's not only connected, but actually one and the same. And you talk about this idea when it comes to understanding suffering, and more specifically, what types of suffering are necessary and others that can be eliminated. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think talking about pain and suffering, it's something that's a little down, but it's out there in the world, so it's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I start my reflection by understanding suffering according to the Buddhist principle of interdependent arising. That is, in other words, the interbeing, as you've mentioned. And there, the Buddhist philosophy identifies the origin of suffering like an innate trait of life, as is said by the first of the Four Noble Truths. So in this sense, I argue that as everything is, even life and suffering inter are. And that is the kind of suffering that is defined as necessary, as it is part of the experience of life itself. So without suffering, there would be no life. And following this, I consider that if we inter-are with everything else, even our experience of life as well as that of suffering, inter-are with the experiences of life and suffering of the others. And thus, I reflect upon the invisible chain of events that can link two apparent distant experiences, which seem therefore having nothing to do one another. Here it comes the understanding that any particular experience, even one of joy, pleasure, or happiness, is inextricably linked with any other kind of experience, which can be of the same sort or completely different and even opposite. An obvious example relates to eating. So imagine this lovely family finally together for Christmas around their rich table, which they have prepared with lots of love and care. However, forgetting that eating animals means supporting the chain of events that is linked to their experience of pain and suffering. And a good reason about this, which I mentioned, is this moral fable, Esarhaddon, King of Assyria, written by Lev Tolstoy, which perfectly fits this kind of life entanglements. Instead, another example that I use that shows two complementary experiences of suffering is that of slaughterhouses workers and their animals to slaughter, whereas this relation can be considered a case of shared suffering. And therefore, to come to the point, all this reasoning finally shows that on one side, there is a kind of suffering which I called vital, in the sense that it is vital to life and that we need to accept as part of our existence, And another one, which what interests me and I think interests also our speech, is what I name unnecessary suffering that is caused by intentional violence and lack of love. And this kind of suffering can surely be alleviated, if not even eliminated, thanks to the awareness we develop towards the weight of our actions and the interdependence of our experience of life with that of others, both human and non-human. And I would just add that this also resonated with what we said about the non-interference principle, according to me. So when I read it, I thought, oh, wow, we're actually saying some similar things concerning this, but also sometimes accepting some kind of suffering that we can't help means non-interfering with it. And in other cases, we can witness a suffering that we can help and therefore interfere according to what might be right. And so I also think that it resonates with this kind of which
You were talking about in the very end now with the principles of non-interference. There is one chapter, one episode of this podcast that we recorded with Jess Bug, who wrote You Had to Be There, Thoughts on Ecological Grief in the Anthropocene, published by Lantern. And she mentions about helping a caterpillar across the road. Just like, it's not going to make a huge impact, but it's going to make a difference for that caterpillar. And we were joking, oh, wait a minute, that's the literal butterfly effect, because how things happen later. And that to say is I kept that thought kept going in my head. I still think about it every so often. I bring it up in other episodes here in the podcast fairly often. But it's because we were talking about respecting what animals want for them. But at one point, if you have a road that shouldn't be there, we already interfered. So by helping the caterpillar, we would just be making sure, like, it's almost like a non-interference because it's a double interference.
kind of tricky also to establish this line that says when we are really interfering and we're not. But yeah, as you said, we might need, like, I think the research that has been done already gives us a lot of hints. But it's sure that we would need way more research about this in order to also be way more aware of when actually we are interfering and going beyond this line or not.
Yeah, and if I might, I mean, this notion of us having already interfered and then fixing our negative interference is definitely another layer of things, and that's something Emma Maris talks about a bit in maybe both her books, but especially the more recent one. That definitely deserves its own treatment as well. But there is a difference between like pushing your original thought, like continually trying to correct the original action versus taking other actions that can make up for it. And so rather than constantly like just kind of saying here, moving animals around to fix the environments we've damaged for them, let's just stop harming the environment. I think that's the idea.
And at one point in the book, multiple people mention about how easy it would be for nature to regenerate if we're not here messing it up. So, and I think we all saw that in 2020 when everybody was home.
Lantern Publishing and Media is devoted to sharing messages of compassion. Our books inspire a better world by telling the stories of animal rights activists, climate activists, and their fights for a world where everyone can live in harmony, no matter their species. Lantern is a 501c non-for-profit organization. Your donation helps us keep our work going. If you can, go to lanternpm.org/donate to help us with any amount. Once again, the website is lanternpm.org/donate. Your generous gift enables you to support our collective mission to inform, inspire, and educate. Thank you very much.
Emily, in your chapter, you and Macy say that humane education acknowledges and embraces this inevitable discomfort through its emphasis on critical reflection and community. I got that quote from the text. Do you have any examples you have experienced of effective humane education? You mentioned we see it more often geared toward kids. Have you seen situations in which it was implemented with adults too, or just effective examples that we can use for reference?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you asking for examples because I think it's so easy to talk about some of these different concepts and ideas, but to really envision what it actually looks like in real life is really important. I think it's hard for me to choose like just one example. Like in the case or in our chapter, we make the case that humane education is a practice. So it's something that anyone and everyone can integrate into their daily interactions with other humans, of any age, whether that's interacting with a friend or family member, or if you are working in spaces like one of the things in my work that I've talked about is how, like veterinarians or people who are working in animal shelters, like we can be integrating these concepts that humane education proposes into these conversations that we're having. And so I've been doing this for several years now. I've definitely experienced how a humane education approach can promote like a more coexistence-centered perspective. So, for example, I often teach about non-human agency and consent. And, I could very easily kind of vilify people for not being more considerate of other animals, or kind of keeping with our conversation about interference and non-interference. Like I could certainly vilify folks for interfering with other animals, for not respecting them. But I try to approach them co-learners with this kind of empathetic recognition that we have all been conditioned to ignore what other animals want and need. There are many systems of oppression at play that rely or that benefit from our kind of ignorance of the realities of other animals. And so when I'm discussing these things with people, I try to help people feel like it's not completely their fault, that there are these other larger systems at play. And so when we can feel that way, when we realize that, when we can bring awareness to that, I think it kind of creates these doors for us to kind of, one, critically think, but also to feel like we maybe have some power to change. And so as part of this process, like I'll also kind of bring in like stories of specific non-human animals, because that always helps people kind of feel open and excited to chat. So like I'll talk about my friend Pearl the sheep and how like she would communicate with me that she was consenting or not to an interaction, just like throughout this process of empathizing and sharing stories. It helps to create this space where we can critically reflect and discuss. We sometimes have to like face the uncomfortable truth that we are participating in harming other animals, even those we care most about, even like the dogs and cats in our homes. But once we do that, like once we can see that we are not supporting the agency of other animals, once we can understand that they do communicate their consent to us through their behavior and body language, we can start to imagine what different relationships with them can look like. And if we're doing this in a space of like vulnerability and accountability, kind of in community with one another, we can then better face that discomfort and move through it. And again, imagine new ways of being. And so for me, as I'm describing this, like this is humane education. Like this is, if you read the chapter for listeners, you'll notice some of the things that I just shared as part of this example come up in as part of like the strategies that make up humane education. So storytelling and critical reflection and empathy, fostering empathy. The results I've seen from this, from like having these kind of conversations with folks, from telling them about my friend Pearl the sheep and our, interactions that we have, and how when she wants a neck massage, she'll approach me and kind of stretch her neck out and maybe lay down and rest her head on my lap. Those are all her ways of communicating with me. Like people, it really hits people in a different way. Like they become just more open to the possibilities of how we can be in relation with other animals. I've had like seasoned animal advocates, like other professional humane educators, like approach me after like my like presentations or the talks I've given on this topic, and have shared that their perspectives have changed. That they, even though they've been interacting with animals their whole lives, that they are suddenly now questioning, how they have interacted with other animals, and are excited to go out into the world with this new perspective. And so I think that, of course, part of this is like the novel kind of topic of non-human consent. Like, I think that that's very impactful. But I also believe that integrating humane education strategies into how I teach about this topic is what has made it so impactful. I definitely think that like embodying the role of humane educator and how we teach and communicate with others can play a really powerful role in promoting coexistence.
When I was reading your chapter, it reminded me a little bit about my experience in school growing up because I went to a Catholic school and more specifically a Franciscan school. So we learned a lot about nature and animals in a very, very early age because of religious teachings. And they would bring us to the school farm where we would be able to hang out with the cows, with the sheep, with the turkeys, where we could like grow the vegetables and all that. We could hang out. They had like special like reptile room that we could hang out with the reptiles and amphibians as well. We had just for frogs a whole section that was just like a conservation program on frogs that they were doing. So it was very nice. But at the same time, I was thinking maybe I had humane education growing up, but then I realized that when all that animal coexistence with me became to a point that I was like, why am I consuming them? I should not. I should go vegetarian, should go vegan. I would have meals in school because we had a school that was the entire day. There were few options that were vegetarian. I turned vegetarian at 13 and I was like, what am I going to eat now in school? So it's the same school that it was giving me that message was also not providing the support needed. And I was like, no, I don't think that could be considered in humane education because one thing doesn't kind of walk hand in hand with the other.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely definitely speaks to a lot of the conflict that we see in traditional education, and also I think it's important to point out that humane education has been like as a field or as a concept has been around since like the late 1800s, and there's definitely different approaches to it, different perspectives about it. And certainly the way I approach humane education, the way I was taught about humane education, like from the Institute for Humane Education, there's definitely this movement to make humane education more comprehensive, to really recognize how different systems of oppression contribute to suffering and how we as individuals can ideally participate in taking action to hopefully cause like the most good and the least harm in our day-to-day lives. And so with that approach in mind, at least speaking for myself as a humane educator, I'm thinking about if even if I'm teaching about other animals, am I still causing harm if I'm including them in that educational process without attending to their agency and consent? So thinking about, like you were talking about your experience, how you had other animals present in your educational experience. What are those messages that we're sending if other animals are present in that in that setting against without actually considering their consent? Did they want to be there? Did they want to be participating or interacting with a bunch of children? And also, where did they come from? Did they want to be taken from their homes? And so there's that piece. And then there's also another big part of humane education is that critical reflection piece, is that piece of acknowledging our assumptions and biases and our cognitive dissonance. So to teach about other animals and trying to promote compassion towards them, but at the same time participating in their harm, again, in my opinion, isn't true humane education.
Yeah, we're talking so much about cognitive dissonance lately. I've been feeling it's a topic that's been catching a lot of people's attention for good, hopefully, because it is something important to talk about. And with that being said, and kind of in the same topic, my next question is for Nathan. In your essay, you make a case for including veganism and non-human animal liberation. And you talk specifically about the thesis constructed by the author Chiara Bocci. Did I pronounce their name right?
I'm not fully sure myself yet. I've only written that name out, and I am not sure 100% how to pronounce it, but I think the last name I would go with Badachi.
Bocci. Okay, Chiara Bocci then. So in Chiara's book, Anarchfeminism, And now my accent is showing off. I promise that I'm not a native English speaker, so I'm doing my best with my accent here. Do you think there are issues in not explicitly including animal liberation when humans talk about total liberation? I think your chapter talks a lot about that, but can you go into more details about what those issues are?
Yes. So this is something that I look for all the time when I read. Essentially, I'm looking for consistent ethics. I'm looking for a total liberationist ethics, what I might call that. And so the issue here was I read that book and I loved it. And so part of that book was it's essentially framed as like the first all-encompassing anarcho-feminist theory. So there's been lots of writings on anarcho-feminism, but they're usually smaller. Badici really brought things together and gave it a coherent, grand framework and went with it. And so I'm really drawn to ideas like that. And so my natural instinct was then, okay, how can we extend this further? Badici is clear that they are not theorizing some complete and closed theory. It is open and evolving. And so my thought was, well, what's missing? What else can be added to this? How can we extend this nicely put and laid out theory here? And so when I read that, Badici does include non-human animals. They are periodically referred to. They come back to them, but the word vegan is absent. And so that was my hang up here. And the reason for that is that anthropocentrism is, if not the norm, I don't know if it'd be the norm over the world in terms of numbers, but at least it's the dominant ideology. So what I worry about is reading a book like Anarcho-Feminism and many others, is that people could read that. They could read the phrase animal liberation in that book, and they could read this holistic theory and ethics, and they could walk away from that book not understanding that they need to be vegan if they buy into that theory, if they believe it, if they think it's convincing. That's what I wanted to insert, and that's what I wanted to make clear, is that is a clear implication, and it's a clear part of what Badici is doing, whether or not that's what they intend to do. And I leave that open in the chapter about maybe that was part of their intention, and that's cool. But non-human animals and veganism specifically, as wide as that term should be understood, is easily and often overlooked if it is not specifically named. So even when people say things like total liberation or freedom for all, often that's anthropocentric. Or if it's not anthropocentric, it includes some non-human animals. Or if it includes non-human animals, maybe it doesn't include plants and so on. And it doesn't actually mean all. And so I'm really trying to emphasize that point here of yes, individual groups need to be named because if they're not, then another thing I worry about is individuals among those groups don't see themselves named. And so they're looking at a theory and think, well, I'm not included here. The others are named, I'm not named. And that's a problem. And so I think the specific mentioning is indeed important so that others recognize, yes, what this person's doing is including me, or at least trying to. That's also true with non human animals and being vegan in particular, is that some may easily think, even if they include non human animals in their thoughts and ethics practices, whatever, they might not still understand what vegan implies. And if you really care about non-human animals, you would have to be vegan. And people all the time think exploitative and harmful practices mean liberation. A lot of people that are into animal welfare think that's essentially animal liberation, and it's not. It's the opposite of animal liberation. And I think of this, there's instances all over the place. I think of an article by Neil Stevens on in vitro meat, which is a whole topic, but meat grown from animal cells. And in an early article on the topic, Stevens describes killing a small number of animals as animal liberation, just because we're not killing them in large numbers. That seems absurd to someone like me who reads that. Or Ben Goldfarb, in a recent book called Crossings on Road Ecology, describes how he doesn't think taking long distance trips in his car or going fishing is contradictory to respecting animals in the environment. And this whole book is about how roads and cars are bad for the environment and non-human animals. And so that's what I mean is readers can read these things that seemingly are inclusive, but still not walk away understanding that veganism must be a part of their ethics if they care about what's being written, and that some of these writings are often contradictory. And so I didn't frame the chapter in terms of all that, but that's what I'm trying to do here. And so my addition, this is not I do not consider this a critique of Badachi, but it's an addition, it's a contribution. It's not aimed at Badachi themselves, but my imagined readers of this volume who could read this and walk away thinking one thing and acting a different way. And this sort of reasoning is also, I realized after the fact, but it's the same reasoning that Badachi titles their book Anarchfeminism. The prefix anarcha they use to refer to all women. And that's one of their points there, is that types of feminism are often exclusionary of types of women. And that's not okay. So Badachi was partly bringing this theory together to be particularly inclusive. And so I'm just trying to stretch that logic in its own direction just a little bit further.
It's interesting how we read a lot about liberation for all and many very important scholars around there, but it seems that every time you're talking you're talking about non-human animals and nature and all that, seems like you're branding the content in a certain way, and that people, oh, so this is just for animal activists. This is not going to be for everybody. It's almost like authors are a little scared of being too vocal about it because they're afraid that their content is not going to reach far enough.
Yeah, I think that word scared, I'm glad you used it. I think that's a lot of it is authors are scared either for the implications that I'm kind of talking about, is what do they have to actually step up to with the words they are saying, or they're afraid at putting off people so people won't read their stuff, or they will critique it instead of talking about it positively, or they're just trying to appeal to more people, which I consider problematic. Essentially, they're watering down their theory. They're appealing to mediocrity instead of trying to make an actual impact. So I think that that is an issue here, and I just think we should always be thinking wider. And an issue I've only very recently, since January, come into is this issue of outer space. And so that's another realm that I realize I have overlooked. And I think Badachi overlooked as well. Badachi stays terrestrial, and they're all very well may mean all, but outer space matters too. There are entities there, and that should be protected just like everything else. And so that, we really need to be constantly like trying to expand our minds and challenge ourselves. What are we leaving out? What are we doing that's not consistent with our beliefs?
You talk about outer space. I'm not going to go too far into it because it's not an area that I know much, but it is something that seems so much bigger than us that it's kind of scary. That it's almost like there's nothing that we can do that can interfere with it too much because it's just so big. But we have history. Humans have history, and we've interfered with some pretty big things so far.
Yeah, I realize that's not part of a topic right now, but it is happening. That's very real. Outer space is not mere science fiction, or dealings with outer space is not mere science fiction. They are not hypothetical ideas. That stuff is starting to happen. But I think this relation, it would be very well thought of in terms of with outer space, humans in outer space, or with Earth in outer space, in terms of interbeing. Stretch that idea as well, and being one in and of the entire universe, because I think that applies.
If you're a human being living in the 21st century, chances are that you check your email every day. Also, chances are that your inbox is constantly pretty full. We know how important it is to keep up to date with things that matter. This is why our newsletter is so amazing. We only send one newsletter a month, and within it, you'll find all our latest news and, sometimes, access to exclusive content. Recently, we went through all our contacts and did a huge cleanup, trying our best to make sure that no one is in the list multiple times and no one's going to keep getting tons of emails. We want to keep you informed without overwhelming you with 1,000 messages. We know you don't have time to waste with 100 new emails. Give your time to what really matters. Go to lanternpm.org and sign up for our newsletter today.
So Nathan was talking about how not only on Earth, but also with the space, with everything that is around us, with the universe itself, this idea of interbeing. Do you think that it applies also not just for plants and earth animals, but also for whatever is out there in the universe?
I mean, yeah, for sure. When when we imagine interbeing, as I'm also mentioning, it's that we have to imagine that everything is interconnected, even, of course, not just applying to terrestrial, but also the universe, because everything is part of everything else. And so if we think about anything that's happening here, even just the fact that we are alive, actually, it's because of, sun and everything that actually exists in the universe. So yeah, for sure, everything relates.
My next question that I have is for all of you. So, a topic that seems to connect all your essays is the idea of thinking collectively while at the same time addressing individual needs. This book does not advocate for needs of the many versus needs of the few. It actually invites us to think about the possibilities of a larger than human world. So, what are, do you believe, the main challenges that we have to overcome in order to get this information out there and make sure that people know and have access to this knowledge?
I was, still referring to this idea of interbeing. I think that there are many things that we can learn from that and overcome some challenges thanks to this idea as well. And I felt that if we simply understand that actually there is no separation between our individual existence and the rest of the existence, we get to this possibility of entering this larger than human space where we all belong together to the unity of things and we all belong to each other at the same time. And following this, one example that I quickly wanted to mention is that this can also be applied to the idea of love itself, for example, which is one of the conclusions that I come to at the end. Because when we mention love, of course, that should also apply to the idea of love, for example, since I perceive love as a rich power of an endless source, and think that we should stop thinking about it in a separate way, in the sense that if we love something or someone, that prevents us from loving something or someone else. On the contrary, whenever we genuinely love, we expand the amount of love in the universe. And so it follows that the possibility of love multiplies instead of splitting itself up into smaller parts. And once again, then it is fundamental to give importance to what we do daily, the quality of our actions and our love. And this should help us to, I don't even want to use the word build, but create more and more a larger than human space around us in our communities and share this way of inhabiting the universe. And in this sense, we should not anymore think that we are the ones that can teach to others how to live, but since finally these others are us, and they can learn from us as much as we can learn from them in this mutual exchange of love and possibilities. I would answer that the first challenge is to overcome any separation and then to learn better to communicate with others and understand the needs, even when they communicate in a different way than ours, as animals do, for example. And finally, to love fully and authentically. And I know that this might sound a little theoretical, but finally, I feel like it follows a bottom-up reasoning and can be applied to communities and society as a basic principle to then build principle.
Yeah, I really love that. I feel like my answer to this kind of question is very similar, but I think that you, Lucrezia, described it in such a way that I feel like will resonate with a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, I think, speaking to like the challenges that we're up against, we're certainly up against these various like systems of oppression, like white supremacy and capitalism and speciesism or anthropocentrism. And so, and I think that these systems of oppression require us to believe that coexistence isn't possible. In order for these oppressive systems to exist, we have to believe that it isn't in our best interests as individuals to coexist, to be in community with each other. And of course, I mean, I would like to believe that that's not true, right? Like, I'd like to believe that equitable interspecies coexistence is indeed possible and that we don't have to compete for resources. We don't have to strive for power in order to have a good life. And so, yeah, I think I very much, I love this idea of interbeing. And I think that coming to understanding coming to understanding that, to embodying that, I think would be so impactful. I think we have to expand our ability to care for individuals. Kind of going back to your question, Louisa, like we have to care for individuals not only for ourselves and our immediate family, but also the individuals in our local community, and then expand our idea of what community is, and to have that not only include other humans, but also the more than human world. And then we have to, I think also, and I think this kind of relates to this concept of interbeing, like recognize that our individual well-being is what makes up the collective well-being. And so we are very much all inextricably interconnected. And then in terms of like getting this information out there and making it accessible, of course, I'm clearly biased that humane education, I think, would be a great strategy for at least one of the strategies for helping to start to shift these perspectives. And again, like I think we can all, in our own work, in our own day-to-day lives, strive to cultivate critical thinking and empathy and compassionate action, and to try to promote these ideas of interbeing, of interconnectedness, with the goal of striving for coexistence despite the challenges that we face.
What I would respond to this question of the main challenges to overcome, and the way you put this, Louisa, about getting information out there and making sure that people know things or know about certain things. I think it would be interesting to see what would happen if people became comfortable with not knowing, not understanding, and respecting that difference. I remember a time when someone told me that while they have a dog and they enjoy dogs and they think it's fun to have relationships with them, they always value human relationships more because we understand each other or can understand each other better or more deeply. And I disagreed. I think the fact that we can have relationships with non-humans, precisely because they are not human, that is way more fascinating. That can actually exist, that it does exist, that sort of communication exists, verbal and nonverbal. That to me is way more interesting than conversing with someone that I know knows the same language and body language and customs or things that I do. That to me is very boring. It's normal. And so but if I'm communicating with a dog or anyone is, neither one of us knows the other's world. And we will never know the other's world. We just won't. There's an inherent limitation. There's a physical limitation. It'll never be overcome. And that's okay. Not only is that okay, I think it's exciting. It's wonderful. And that sort of not knowing is a limit I acknowledge and respect. And I think it makes the world so much more interesting. And as something also like plant studies blossoms, right, to use a plant metaphor these days, kind of behind animal studies, that idea is really big there, of that plants may have intelligence, they may have consciousness, they definitely have communication, but it is such a foreign to humans type of those things that we just don't understand them, and we can't. We don't have the same physiological parts, yet we have similar ways of being, things that are intelligible in a roundabout way through ourselves, but we will never know what it's like to be a plant. And plants may never know that a thing called a human exists, or if that sort of thing even makes sense. But it's that unknowing that I think makes life so fascinating and just gives it the infinite possibilities for bringing people together if we can respect that sort of difference.
We're always talking about learning more and knowing, and also embracing the unknown. Even if we're talking about human relationships, you can never be 100% sure what's going on in somebody else's head or how they are feeling and experiencing the world. And yet we try to empathize, or we are empathetic.
Do you love new books? Do you need more titles about veganism, animal rights, and climate activism on your bookshelf? Then go to lanternpm.org and check out all our books and ebooks available for purchase. You can find anything from beautiful illustrated picture books that introduce children to the values of compassion for our fellow animals, to thoroughly researched nonfiction books that give you all the facts to help you live a healthy vegan life. Go to lanternpm.org and explore all of our books today.
My second to last question for everyone again, since finishing writing for this book, what are the signs of hope, moments of joy, glimmers, as some people put it, have you witnessed in your life in regards to moving towards a world in which humans can coexist better with the more than human world?
Well, I did have to think really hard about this question just because it can be hard, especially I feel like it's just increasingly challenging for me sometimes to find hope. But it is, there is still moments or glimmers of joy. And there are certainly people like the people in this Zoom room today do give me hope, that inspire me. And actually, since finishing the chapter for this book, I started teaching undergrad and graduate students in animal behavior and anthrozoology programs. And my students definitely give me hope. Like, they are so passionate about the well-being of other animals. Many of them are already out in their communities promoting coexistence in different ways. Many of them are just so passionate about equity and I feel like, and liberation. And so it is truly an honor to support them in their journeys. And yeah, they definitely give me hope.
And I think concerning me, I actually saw, because once again, when I was writing my chapter, I kind of did this little storytelling. So I started from the past of my life, let's say, and I was reasoning on how my research was also affecting my life or helping my life as well. And so I guess one of the most beautiful phenomena that I witnessed was really concerning my private life. And basically what happened is that I started to get close to all this research on suffering, but as well, I started to get close to first vegetarianism and then veganism around my 20s. And I feel like I claimed I had these two different phases, of which the book was kind of in between. So during this first phase, it was a phase made of stronger radical speeches, lots of pressure towards those who surrounded me, but hadn't made my choice yet, as if everyone had to have an epiphany kind of at the same time as I did. And a lot of personal suffering in seeing that things did not change as fast as I expected. Instead, since I wrote this chapter, I kind of entered the second phase where it was characterized by a lot of acceptance on one side, but on the other side, it was not surrender. So I kind of kept on living according to my empathy and values, of which I always talked pleasantly with whoever showed interest towards non-humans and our possibilities of coexistence with them. And having this, I had kind of a net already of sensitive and empathetic souls around me. And I saw that this kind of expanded. And I understood that by taking responsibility for my feelings and consequent actions, I kind of led a silent example, which did not pressure anyone anymore, but simply touched people's intimate reflection. And as I wrote in my chapter, the key is acknowledging to be a uniquely interconnected fragment. You heal your interconnection and this healing thrives. And this is what I witnessed. I saw how my way of being in the world impacted my micronet of people, as well as I saw that some of these people were working in the same circles as I myself had been in some previous circle that had positively changed me. And I think that's a beautiful phenomenon to acknowledge, as joy and love have flourished around you and then are spreading under your eyes. And that can be linked with a lot of things that happened in my belief to going vegan and then starting doing activism and seeing people around me that started having more interest in what they what they ate and how they felt towards some topics and issues, and then maybe starting doing activism as well, or just people raising more questions towards some kind of choices that I had made or other people around me had made. So I think that gave me a lot of joy to see that I was working at it as a fragment in this universe, and that was something that I had witnessed.
I think that is beautiful. We have, Emily, like you were saying, it's kind of hard to be hopeful lately. That's why I've been trying to wrap up the podcast episodes with moments of joy, moments of hope. I also took a page out of Hope Bohannik's book, because on her podcast, her last question is always like a moment of hope. on my end, since I've read the book, I'm almost fully vegan now. And I've had moments in which friends who were not even vegetarian decided to join me for a meal or something. They were like, no, I'll do fully vegan just to see what it's like. So I think that that's a good moment to help them see that it's not impossible, that it's not hard. To wrap it up, I want to ask if anybody wants to share anything with our listeners. So this would be the great moment if you have any projects coming up, if you have any work out there in the online world that you want to share with our listeners. This is your moment. Get on the soapbox, spread the message, and if you can send me the links later, I'll add to the podcast description.
So I am in the beginning stages of trying to put together 2 other edited books, and they should be co-edited because I prefer the collaboration. But one of those is on anarchfeminism. So partially that book is to a more concerted effort on Badachi's anarcho-feminism book to expand on that and build on that, but that is not the sole focus. Part of the point of that is I do see that as a very wide topic, and I like wide topics and bringing people together to see where ideas can go. Another thing that I think can be particularly interesting and relevant for listeners of a podcast like this is to co-edit a book that is critical of in vitro meat, or cultured meat, or cultivated meat is the insider term. But that is a topic that lots of people just kind of jump on the bandwagon of and think is this great thing. And I think it's actually the opposite if you look at it. So those are projects I'm trying to start and work on and push forward. But in terms of anything else in general to the listeners, what I've kind of come to, what I do, and I like to try to encourage people to do personally through conversations or through writing, but is to question everything. And that was a Discovery Channel's slogan for a while, and I by no means mean to promote an entity like that. But the idea is certainly good if we take it literally. But that also most definitely includes questioning ourselves. And that also includes what's left out of that little too pithy, right? Too simple question everything is also to continually question everything. So even after you've questioned everything and you've questioned yourself, do it again. And so it's more like question everything all the time. I think that's the thing. Never stop thinking, never stop trying to push your own boundaries and those of others.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Nathan. I think that I am just so passionate about critically thinking and reflecting on my own assumptions and beliefs, and also being very critical and being willing to question everything around me. And I think that it certainly makes for a more, not only a more interesting world to like kind of approach, at least for me, like I try to approach everything with that curiosity, not necessarily like critical, not necessarily like, I try not to be too judgy, but I also do try to approach things with curiosity and be willing to consider the perspectives and experiences of others, but also hopefully try to encourage others to critically reflect on their own beliefs and assumptions and their own perspectives. So thanks for mentioning that, Nate. But yeah, I think the other piece for me that is so important is community and connecting with others. And so I have a few different projects I'm kind of working on and definitely spending a lot of time teaching. But I do just love connecting with others. I love being in community with folks who are interested in these topics like interspecies coexistence and humane education and collective liberation and veganism, all of those things. So I encourage folks to reach out if they want to connect with me. My website is www.coexistence.consulting. And I look forward to connecting with folks.
Finally, I would just add to our listeners, just read the book, comment, make comments about it, share it with your neighbors and viewers, and also give it to strangers, because that will mean to make also your little work as a fragment of the universe you are, being aware of the importance you have in this life. I would say finally, remember that you aren't an isolated piece of the puzzle looking for your own sense of life. And since you are better, we all are part of a whole of this magic organism that breathes as we do, we must stay aware of our interbeing with everything, everyone, and everywhere. Thus, remembering that any of our actions, even simply giving this book to a stranger, will produce a knock-on effect that helps.
Well, thank you very much, all three of you, for being here at Lantern Voices today. It was a pleasure talking to everybody. And I'll let you go now. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Luisa.
Thank you.
This was part 1 of Exploring Topics in Non-Human Coexistence. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Nathan, Lucrezia, and Emily today. In 2 weeks, we'll talk to Amanda Williams, Mark Sushita, and Varun Joshi about their essays in this very same book. If you stayed with us until now, it's time to share with you our special discount coupon. If you go to lanternpm.org, click on ebooks, and select any ebook that was ever featured in this podcast, so Exploring Topics, The Veganic Grower's Handbook, Hopohanics, The Humane Hoax, Just Bugs, You Had to Be There, you can click the book, go to checkout, and then on the coupon field, you just write Lantern Voices 25. That is Lantern Voices, just like the podcast all together, and the numbers 2 and 5. That will give you 25% off on all ebooks that were ever presented here on Lantern Voices, now or in the future. So that means that for the next episodes, you will also be able to use this coupon to get 25% off on our ebooks. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Don't forget to rate the podcast. That really helps us to spread the word and reach more people. And follow us on Instagram at LanternPM. I'll see you in 2 weeks to continue the conversation on exploring topics in non-human coexistence. Bye!